Thank you for joining me on my presentation about interactions among living things. This is part one of a two-part series. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist and geologist who was a major contributor to the theory of evolution and natural selection. And today we're going to be talking about how do adaptations help organisms survive. And the three topics we're going to cover today is natural selection, adaptations, and niche. A characteristic that makes an individual better suited to a specific environment may eventually become common in that species through a process called natural selection. And in natural selection, individuals whose unique characteristics are well suited for an environment tend to survive and produce more offspring. And offspring that inherit these characteristics also survive and reproduce. And natural selection is the main driving force for evolution. Now, natural selection is something that happens naturally. It happens out in the wild. And there's something that is similar to natural selection, but it's not natural. It's driven by humans, and that is selective breeding. And in selective breeding, humans will breed plants and animals for specific traits. And that selection process does not result in a different species, but it results in different breeds of plants, animals, and dogs, cats. And one difference between natural selection and selective breeding is natural selection resulting in evolution of a new species takes place over the course of hundreds to thousands of years. And selective breeding takes place over a relatively short time. Sometimes it can, be less than 10 generations before you have a new breed of dog. So next we need to talk about adaptations. And natural selection results in adaptations, and adaptations are behaviors and physical characteristics that allow organisms to live successfully in their environment. Take, for example, the giraffe. The giraffe was not always a long-necked creature. It evolved into a species with a long neck, but it used to have a variety of neck lengths. And as food became more scarce, the giraffes that had longer necks were able to reach food at higher levels in trees where there was less competition for food. And so these giraffes with the long neck were able to survive and go on to reproduce, and the short-necked giraffes did not. So this example of the long neck is an example of an adaptation. And eventually, that long neck adaptation became so prevalent that is now the appearance of giraffes as we know them. And if we take a look at the king penguin, he has an alternate coloration for predator avoidance. It helps him to blend in with his surroundings, and he has some physiologic adaptations. His circulatory system allows him to retain and dissipate heat as needed. He has behavioral adaptations where he puts rocks in his beak to help him sink in the water. And then he has structural adaptations where he has a thin layer of blubber that helps him retain heat in a cold environment. every organism has a variety of adaptations that are suited to its specific living conditions that help it to survive. This is important to understand. You would never find a camel living in the same environment as an owl. They're suited for different environments. And camels have adaptations like long eyelashes and thin slit nostrils, and these help them to survive in sandy conditions. They have to be able to survive in sandstorms. So these adaptations help them do that. And they have wide feet that are well suited for walking in sand, and their intestinal tract is extremely long, which helps them to absorb as much free water as possible from the food that they eat. And that's necessary for the hot, dry climate that they live in, which this is much different than our owl. Our owl, we don't see these long eyelashes. He doesn't need them. He has a disc-shaped face, large eyes, and asymmetric ears that make him well suited for hunting prey at night. And he doesn't need these wide feet like a camel for walking in sand. Instead, he needs talons, sharp talons or fingernails that help him grab onto prey. And he also has these silent feathers that make him a great predator for sneaking up on his prey. Individuals with characteristics that are poorly suited to a particular environment are less likely to survive and reproduce. If a species cannot adapt to changes in its environment, then the entire species can become extinct. We know our environment's changing. It changes all the time. And when organisms can't adapt to those changes, then the species can become extinct. For example, the woolly mammoth was not able to adapt to climate change. And climate change for them ended up drying up their lake beds. There wasn't enough water to sustain the population, and so the population dwindled to near extinction levels. And then unfortunately humans were hunting them at the same time, so then humans were able to hunt them into extinction. But had they been able to develop some sort of adaptation to be resilient to climate change, then perhaps that wouldn't have happened. And this leads us to our last topic, which is niche. And a niche is a role of an organism within its habitat. You'll remember from our last unit, habitat is the place, a physical place where an organism lives, whether it's a burrow in the ground or a hole in a tree or a specific area of a tree or a specific tree, a specific type of pond. A habitat is a physical place where an organism lives. And the niche is that organism's role in that habitat. And so a niche is determined by what type of food the organism eats, how it obtains this food, what other organisms it eats, when and how the organism reproduces, and the physical conditions the organism requires to survive. In this picture, we see 5 different species of warblers. And warbler is a type of bird, and in this picture we see 5 different species of warbler. And you can notice in this picture they inhabit the same tree, but they each have their own particular little part of the tree that they inhabit. Some live at the very top of the tree, some live kind of in the mid portion and to the outside, others live on the mid portion towards the center, and some live in the middle of the tree but towards the bottom. And this is largely determined by the type of food that they eat. And the different types of insects that they eat, there might be different insects living towards the top of the tree versus the bottom of the tree, and different insects living in the middle of the tree, the interior of the tree versus the outside of the tree. And so they have different beak adaptations that help them eat different types of insects. And then that allows them to live together in their own particular little niche in the same tree without competing for food sources. Well, thank you so much for watching my presentation, and I hope it contributes to your understanding.